So where does the story of Black America actually begin? I mean, it's one of the most fundamental questions of identity, right? And for so many people, that journey to find the answer, well, it doesn't start in some dusty history book. It starts a lot closer to home.
It's often just a single fragment of a family's story, a memory passed down that's the spark. That's what kicks off this personal quest to connect the dots of a history that's been broken apart or erased, or maybe just retold by other people. It's a search for a real starting point. And this search has led to two really powerful and competing origin stories that totally challenge the timeline we're all taught. One says there's an ancient indigenous American root, while the other points to a global African diaspora. So let's explore the ideas behind both.
Okay, let's start with the first perspective. This is the theory that the ancestors of many Black Americans weren't brought here from across an ocean at all. Proponents of this idea argue they were, in fact, already here, part of a really advanced pre-Columbian civilization.
This theory really asks us to just look at the American landscape with completely new eyes. It suggests that the proof of this ancient presence isn't buried and lost forever. It's actually all around us. It's just been misinterpreted or mislabeled for centuries.
What's so fascinating here is that this isn't some brand new idea. If you look at sources from as early as 1890, they were already making a really clear distinction between two groups. On one side, you have what they called the mound builders in the Mississippi Valley, a prehistoric people building massive pyramids. And on the other, the Indian tribes of the Atlantic coast, who they saw as living in a totally different, later era with very different artifacts. And this just gives you a sense of the sheer scale of what these mound builders left behind. I mean, we're talking about the sprawling city of Cahokia near St. Louis, or the Great Serpent Mound in Ohio. Proponents of this indigenous theory point to these incredible structures as just undeniable proof of a highly organized, very sophisticated society that was thriving long before any European ships got here.
And this brings us to a really compelling and, let's be honest, pretty controversial modern take. Researchers who follow this line of thinking, they travel through places like the Appalachians and argue that what we've all been taught are just natural mountains are actually ancient man-made pyramids, now just overgrown and hidden in plain sight.
So right here, this is the fundamental split. You've got one theory that roots Black American heritage deep in the soil of the Americas itself. The other sees it as part of a much, much bigger global story of humanity's origins. So let's explore that second theory now, which builds an equally profound claim to ancient heritage.
Okay, so this second viewpoint kind of zooms way out from America to the entire planet. It frames Black history not as a regional story, but as the foundational story of all humankind, all starting from a single continent.
This quote, it just gets right to the heart of the theory. It claims that if you go back far enough in time, in any region on Earth, Europe, Asia, the Americas, doesn't matter, you will find an original Black population. This perspective answers that big question of origins with a huge claim. We didn't just come from Africa, we populated the whole world from Africa.
Now, this idea is grounded in an academic framework called Afrocentrism. It's a school of thought that basically says, let's shift the historical lens. Instead of seeing the world from a European point of view, it recenters the whole narrative on Africa, arguing that it's the cradle of all human civilization.
So, according to this theory, over tens of thousands of years, wave after wave of migrations carried humanity's first people out of Africa to literally every corner of the globe. And the presence of Black people in the Americas, in this view, wasn't some recent event tied to slavery, but the final step in an ancient worldwide settlement.
Now here's the thing. This debate over ancient history, it's not happening in a vacuum. It is deeply, deeply connected to a much more recent history, a century-long struggle for political power, self-definition, and control over the narrative of Black identity in America.
This timeline really shows a century of organized thought that's all about self-definition. From Marcus Garvey's Pan-African movement to the Nation of Islam to the call for Black power in the 60s, there's this one central theme: rejecting the mainstream histories and the urgent need to define Black identity on its own terms.
And to really drive home the stakes of this internal debate, you had activists like Malcolm X using these really powerful metaphors. The house Negro versus the field Negro. It wasn't just about class. It was a whole framework for understanding different ways to think about liberation, about allegiance, and about deciding the best path forward for Black people in America. And these movements have very clear, very practical goals. You could see them right here. This was about way more than just ideas. It was a blueprint for actual tangible power.
controlling your own schools and businesses, building political institutions, and most importantly, reclaiming the right to write your own history.
So as we start to bring all these threads together, the indigenous theory, the global African theory, and all these political movements, one central theme just keeps coming up. It's all about the power of the narrative.
At the end of the day, both of these origin stories, even though they're scientifically different, they represent the same profound act, an effort to reclaim a people's history from outside definitions. This is a struggle for control over the very first page of the story. It's a debate over who gets to have the authority to define a people's past.
And that leaves us with this final and I think crucial question. Because whether a people's history is rooted deep in American soil or in a global African diaspora, the way that story gets told doesn't just shape our sense of who we are today, it literally charts the map of our future.